Recording here. All right, so I am Carrie Cedarquist, and I am the Director of Community Impact for United Way of North Idaho. And we are all here to really calibrate and do a little bit of training on the new reporting or application and evaluation platform for our grant cycle 2020 to 2021. Many of you have been part of this train for many years, longer than I've been here, and some are very fresh to it. So if at any time somebody wants to jump in and add something, like I said, I am recording and we are asking you to mute yourself, but raise your hand or put something in the chat box if you have a comment to add. I think we're a learning community here. I think it's pretty safe to say that there's veterans here who know what they're doing and have some insights. There's fresh perspective here. And so really we all rely on each other's knowledge and experience to make the best decisions that we can for the dollars that we're entrusted with to invest in the community. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started here. So this is our, oops, got a chat already here. All right. Let me do a little bit. So Arwen, how do I make you a co-host?
So if you go to, it just moved it around on me. So then that way, if you have a co-host, you can have somebody else who's monitoring feedback, and you can actually, as the administrator, you can mute people.
Okay.
So if you go to click on the participants window, and if you click over my name, you should be able to choose more on the menu option. And there should be a make co-host option available. And then that should turn on my ability to mute anybody that possibly left themselves unmuted on accident or is creating reverb or background noise.
So if I don't see a make co-host, I see make host. Is that the same thing?
It is not the same thing, but that is okay.
Because I think it would switch it from me being the host, right?
Correct. So, and you're going to be sharing your screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So then I would just go ahead and leave it as is. But if you're the host, you can click on the little bubbles on people's corners and you can mute them. So if you see somebody creating background noise, you can just mute them as the host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
so
good.
You can have a nice clean recording.
Okay, great. Well, let's see here. Now I got to figure out how to advance my slide. Perfect. All right, so here's our roadmap for the next couple of hours here. We're going to hop onto the EC Impact reporting platform for about 15, 20 minutes. And I'm going to show you around. Some of you, if you were part of the evaluation of the 2018 to 2020 impact councils, then you've already seen it for the end of year evaluations. Pretty straightforward, it seemed like on that last round. There wasn't too many tech issues, which is great. There we go. All right. Okay. So we'll be orienting on EC Impact. I've got a colleague and friend here, Nora Carpenter, that is going to share with us some of the ALICE data. So Nora is the executive director or CEO of United Way Treasure Valley, and she's graciously sharing her time to visit with us about that. We're going to have another guest speaker. Two guest speakers, actually. So the COVID impacts on local families with Sam Tushkon, who was formerly with the Panhandle Health District Child Care Resource Center. When that contract ended, we were able to scoop her up and have her join United Way as a contractor for our early care and education work. Also, we'll have Chris Keim, who is the chair of the ALICE Task Force and on the United Way board. And board liaison for the impact councils in the health impact area, speaking about some of his observations with the ALICE Task Force. We'll review the Impact Council goals, as well as our diversity, equity, and inclusion practice. Then we'll go over the timeline for the fall grant cycle. And then we'll have some time at the end to visit about some of the critical questions you may want to consider when you're evaluating, and have some time for just open question and answer discussion, anything else that we want to cover. So off we go. So first things first, so you should all have received an invitation to set up an account in EC Impact. So what you're looking at here is the volunteer facing page. This is Mark Tucker's volunteer page. So when you log on here, and I'll resend the link in all of the follow-up for this meeting, because it is a specific link that's associated with our United Way, to take you to the right spot, because EC Impact is a platform that's used by United Ways and other community-based granting organizations across the nation. So I want to make sure you're getting into the right one. And you'll be prompted, of course, to log in with your email and your password. If you haven't yet logged in for the first time, your password will be a temporary PWD123, and you'll be prompted to change that once you log in for the first time. You'll also get a prompt to complete a volunteer acknowledgement or agreement, as well as a conflict of interest statement. And many of you have done that already. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out and I can help you through that. But when you first log on, I just want to show you around some of the pieces here. So up here, you will have on the left side of your navigation tree, a little information here, your account that has your contact information. That's where it's very helpful for us to have like your address, for example, in case you want to send you maybe thank you notes or any information, a soon to be sent little gift that I teased earlier. Additional information, supervisor information, those are not active right now, but you can go in and take a look at those. Your acknowledgement is your volunteer acknowledgement, your conflict of interest, self-explanatory. And then down on the side here, once we get down to evaluations, the community impact investment fiscal year 2021, that's the one that we're working under right now. And so if you get lost and you need to navigate to that, you can just click on that and that'll bring you up to where your assigned evaluations will be. I'm not going to quite go into that just yet because I wanted to point out another thing. So over here on the resource center on the left side navigation, there's two links. There's agency resources and there's also reviewer resources. So under these, if you go to the reviewer resources, you'll be able to see a couple of things. So here's the training manual, and I'm not going to open it and view it right now. You can do that on your own time. This gives you a really step-by-step of navigating the site. It's kind of a lot there, but you can kind of skim through and find what you're looking for if you get lost or you can't get a hold of me. And then the Community Care Fund 2019-2020 Goals and Strategies is the document that you've probably seen before, but it just outlines in detail the goals by impact area and those strategies and priority areas. So it's kind of a helpful guide for kind of recentering or grounding and remembering what it is that you as the councils, so both past councils, and I think we did a refresh in 2018 or 2019, just to update any of the language that we needed to. So those are our current documents of what we're working towards. The other thing here in the agency resources that may be helpful to you as well is the local results framework. So those are the indicator and outcome measurements that we onboarded back in 2018. Again, our aggregate measures that we use. We ask every funded agency to select at least one indicator and one outcome. And you'll see those as you're going through the applications, but that's our way of being able to proactively convey the collective impact of the Community Care Fund investments. So we'll definitely have more conversation about that, but I just wanted to let you know where these are. So if you go back to home, right now, what will be on your screen is your assignments, basically. So when you log in after the 30th, so the application deadline is the 30th. So after you log on, let's say October 1st, you will have some assignments here. You can click here to continue working. So Mark has already started on his evaluation of our sample program, Space Cats. And you'll have a number of evaluations just according to the impact area. Right now, we have 27 agencies who have submitted 30 separate programs for a total request as of today of 128,242. The last couple of days of a grant, typically we see another handful of agencies submitting programs, so that number may go up a little bit, but I think typically for the most part, that's going to be, we'll probably be working between 30 and 40 programs. At this point, I don't have a breakdown of the applications by impact area, but you'll certainly have that the first day that you're ready to evaluate. So again, that October 1 date. So when you are ready to evaluate, you'll start on, it'll be red and it'll say not started. But since this one's already been clicked on for sample purposes, you'll go in, the agency is here, you can review the agency information. And there's not any evaluation that necessarily goes into the agency information. So I'm going to close this window for now, but you'll see when you click on a form, you have your evaluation scorecard that pops out. So you can be looking at both your scorecard and the application at the same time and just click that tab to shrink it back. I'm going to go to, if you look up in the top left here, you can see you can jump to different forms. So agency information is what the agencies put in when they initially register, and then they all have to assign a program. So even if an agency is requesting, let's say operational funds, so, you know, grant scheme, salaries, whatever, they still have to assign a program to it. And so you can jump to different forms here. Your basic program information is going to take you down here to their info. Hopefully they've put in a little more information than I have here. And so my suggestion here, just good practice, is to go through and read the full application, get a good sense of it, and then go through again with your evaluation scorecard. So right now we're looking at the program information for Space Cats. You can see their amount requested, the program narrative, and we still have certainly a mindset of continuous improvement, but we've tried to make the evaluation language the same language as that which is in the application, so that it's more straightforward and easier to find for you as a reviewer, the information that you're looking for and making scores on. So this is going to be your overall, and that's why I say kind of first step is good idea to just get an overview of the application, what they're asking for, get a sense of it, write down questions if you have them or make notes, and then you can go through and score each of these. So you've got your overall general comments, you have your funding recommendation, approve of not approve, which you can wait to do at the end, however you prefer to do it. And then in the program narrative, you have weighted drop down options here. So this ranges from 0 to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 0 to 5. And once you make a selection for each of these, down at the bottom, it totals up your score here. So you have a section to make comments in a couple of places. You've got general comments, you've got program narrative comments, your organizational capacity, and then down here in the attachments, this one, so if you, this first question, the project budget is clear and provides a thorough rationale for dollars requested. This one looks very similar to the others. This has the not demonstrated to excellence. And then these here are documentation that the applicant either attaches or doesn't attach. And so those are either a yes or no question. So we have a question from Amy Bowler asking about the weighted responses. So let me just pull this up quickly. Amy's question is, are you required to give a weighted response to each item, or can you skip one if need be? You are required to put in a response for each one. So I'm going to move this box over. So if you look up in the top here of your evaluation scorecard or your application, up in the top right-hand corner, there's a link here that says supporting documents. That's where you'll find those, the 990, the diversity, or excuse me, the anti-discrimination statement, any other supporting documentation that we've asked for in the application is going to be there. So the letter of determination, and these are just placeholders documentation that I've uploaded here, but each of these 3 attachments is required for the applicant. And so you don't necessarily need to go deep into, for example, their 990, because that's something that the finance committee will do when they do the financial review, but just checking and make sure that they have a letter of determination. For some organizations, because we open this to not only 501c3 organizations, but schools and health districts as well, they'll have a documentation that explains their status. So it may not necessarily be the 501c3, but it could be some other type of documentation that lets us know that they're either a school, educational institution, or health district. The other thing that you can do, which is a pretty cool feature from my perspective, is you can ask questions. So again, top right-hand corner of this, you can click on view or ask questions, and that opens a box for you. These questions go directly to me. If I can answer them, because I've been in communication with the applicants over the application period, I may be able to answer them. If not, I'll simply forward them directly to the program manager that's listed as the main contact for the proposal. But what you can do is type in your question here, like, what the heck about the space cats? And then you simply save my work, and that submits the question to me. Then I can either have a group response and respond to everybody in the Impact Council group, or I can just send it back directly to you. The answer to that question is what I mean. So I would like to pause here for just a moment and find out if anybody has any questions about navigating the application or the evaluation process. And go ahead and unmute yourself if you have questions.
Carrie, I'm sorry, I have lots of questions.
Please, go ahead.
Is there a chance that we might receive an application from someone that doesn't qualify, that they're either not a 501c3, an education entity, or a health entity that wouldn't qualify, and how would we know that?
You know, that's a good question. Sometimes they would get, I don't know, do you have an example you might be able to share?
Well, like, I guess maybe if it's a daycare that's providing educational support or curriculum, are they considered an education entity? Do they qualify? I guess I don't know.
You know, there's a sort of a self-selection process with that. So organizations that fall outside of the 501c3 at this point have most likely contacted me to find out if they would be eligible based on their status, because when they register their agency, they have to put in some sort of explanation of who they are and what they do. So it's not likely, but if that comes up, so if you're going through and you see their letter of determination or whatever they've provided and it raises a red flag for you, just send me a question or alert me via email directly or phone call or something, and I'm happy to look into that. You will have 2 weeks between the time that the evaluations open and when they need to be completed. And between that time, you'll be meeting with your counsel at least once to kind of discuss that. And so, at this point, because of needing consistency, we have set that parameter of health district, educational institution or entity, or 501c3. But if there's something outside of that, then we can look into it and make a determination.
So, but most of them have already been sort of pre-screened by you before you've assigned them, or should we be watching for that?
They've probably been, again, like pre-screened when they registered their agency. And, Liz just brought up a question here. Liz, thank you for submitting that chat. You have a good point. What agency is better suited for different grant pools such as health? I'm not quite sure what you mean, Liz. Are you able to unmute?
Yeah. So like, what if somebody, like if we're reading their application, we're like, oh my gosh, cause we've done this before, right? Like, what if maybe these guys should be under health or something, or, a different group than ours. Mm-hmm. Then do we just like send you a message and say, hey, maybe, this is better suited somewhere else? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. And that's easy for me to do, to contact the agency and find out if they could, because it's kind of tied to their metric as well. When they register their program as like a health program, then only the metrics for the health programs come up. And so it'd be kind of a dialogue and with that agency to figure out if it is a good fit, but that's certainly doable. So just to explain to everyone else, to add context to Liz's question, there have been times where an agency, for example, may apply to the, let's say, financial stability, and it's a food bank program because that seems to make sense. However, it may be the case that that program is really working towards better nutritional outcomes, so it may be a better fit for health rather than the financial stability outcomes and strategies. In that case, and we have had this situation before where that agency's application gets shifted to a different impact area. Does that answer your question, Liz, or does that make sense to folks? Okay. Other questions? Okay, so then up here, just to kind of wrap this up, on your scorecard, you've got a couple of icons here that you can use. You want to save your work. The system does time out after a certain point. It'll pop up. It'll say, are you still here? Or something to that effect. But save your work. This one is save and return to your assigned evaluations. Save and mark as completed. You'll only be able to do that if you have put in the required evaluation answers, so those drop downs and the comments and things. And then this is just return to my assigned evaluations. You can also print out at any time the evaluation form. You can also print out the application. So if we navigate back to my assigned evaluations, and you scroll down, you can, on the left of this, or excuse me, on the right of your assigned evaluations, to the far right, you have an option where you can print that full program and agency application. All right, so Before I move on, any last thoughts or comments or questions about this? Or you can write them down and we can return to them at the end.
Carrie, if it times you out and you're in the middle of an evaluation, will it save your work or will you lose it?
It saves it. Let's see. It saves the progress that you've made.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I would say if you're going to walk away from whatever, I mean, it's a good idea to just to save anyways. But it does have an auto save function. Okay. Oh, sorry, that's the other thing. So up here, you've got your tabs of my assigned evaluations. And then if you've submitted a question, it'll show up in your tab here. And then once I respond or the agency responds, the answer will be here. So that's easy for you to look at and kind of organize if you have those specific questions. Okay, so I am going to now, the next item on our agenda is the Alice presentation. And let me see here, get this centered. We're gonna go to the full slide. So before I introduce our guest speaker here, Nora, I wanna just create context for why we have this, this part of the presentation. So we have our council goals that we're going to go back and look at. And of course, United Way works for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in every North Idaho community. But with that, we have this really rich extra level of data that helps us understand the true financial struggle and a much clearer picture of our community. And that is the Alice report. And so over the years, so we've been at this since 2016. United Way has sponsored in collaboration with United Ways of the Pacific Northwest Association this report that provides that granular level data, hyper localized, so that we can truly understand and have valid data to help guide our investments to where the resources are needed the most. So I think that's all I want to say about that. I'd like to turn it over to Nora, and we've asked Nora to join us because she does a wonderful presentation on the Alice report, and United Way Treasure Valley has really been a leader in how to use and mobilize the report, not just for United Ways and community-based organizations, but at the policy, systems, and environment level. So we're really fortunate to have Nora here. And Nora, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you if you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And thank you all for being passionate members of your community and active volunteers with United Way. We couldn't do our work without you, and the work that you do, the decisions that you make, the expertise that you bring is incredibly valuable to driving the goals that your community has set for yourself. So on behalf of all of us in Idaho, all your Idaho colleagues, we say thank you. Carrie's going to drive the show for me. So Carrie, if you would, Maestro, go ahead and take us to the next slide. So just to level set, many of you are familiar with the term ALICE. It's an acronym. Stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. But more importantly, it's a person's name. We could call folks who are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling, barely getting by, others, those people, not us. But the reality of it is Idaho is dependent on our ALICE working population, and they are a significant part of our economy. They are our friends, they're our neighbors, maybe they're our family members. Most of us have been ALICE at some point in our life, and maybe due to the pandemic, we or people who are close to us find themselves or ourselves right back there. But the whole genesis of this project, as Carrie so eloquently teed up, really goes down to the idea that in Idaho, we didn't really have good data. We really were using acronyms like, oh, poor people, or people living paycheck to paycheck. And that really dehumanizes are these folks that we care about, we love so very much. And so with great intent, the acronym itself is wonky, asset limited income constrained employed. But the point is it brings a face. All of us can bring to mind someone when we hear the term ALICE. Carrie, if you would, please. So this pandemic has really made this data, which is brand new for 2020 and is updated every couple of years, has really made this data more valuable to us as we do our United Way work, but really to the greater community, from the very top of the policy chain at the governor's office to our elected officials who are representing us down at the Capitol building here in Boise, Idaho, to our municipal or city county officials, to our business leaders, et cetera. Idaho runs on ALICE, and we now have this term called essential workers. And perhaps those of us before who spent a lot of time with this data understood or kind of conceptualized the idea that ALICE is essential, but the pandemic has really brought to life how important ALICE is to the Idaho economy, to our business communities, to our health systems, to grocery, logistics, virtually everything about our society in Idaho is dependent on our ALICE workers. And so for us to be able to understand who they are, to understand their circumstances is super important. The pandemic also has really shone a light on, and I think you'll see here very shortly, how very fragile ALICE was before March 2020, which in my mind feels like about 25 years ago now. I've decided that in COVID time, months are like dog years. You know, it's been forever ago that we didn't have this crazy pandemic. But ALICE was really fragile before the pandemic, and ALICE has been exponentially impacted by the pandemic. And that gives greater urgency to our work as we think forward about strategies and investments. Carrie, if you would, please. Thank you very much. So for those of you who like to geek out to data, before I get into the bones of this thing, I want to let you know that the ALICE report that you'll find through United Way North Idaho's website or at unitedforalice.org, which I'll share with you again at the end, is really flexible. So whether it's in your United Way impact decision-making work or in your regular work or just as a really passionate member of the community, if you want to get in and just get it all over you, the data is super customizable this year. What I'm going to show you obviously is pretty static because we're looking at slides, but the data is not static. In fact, it is more customizable and will be updated more in real time than it ever has before. So this is as you think about connecting and sharing this information, know that the report can be almost anything you need it to be as it shines a light on your community. Okay, go ahead, please, ma'am. All righty, so I just want to take a minute and acknowledge that your United Way in North Idaho, along with your 6 partners, as Carrie said, help make this possible, along with those sponsors that we saw on that very first slide. So kudos to you and your leadership for recognizing how important this is. If you would, please, ma'am. All right, let's dive in. Let's start getting some goods all over us. So 40% of the state of Idaho meets the definition of ALICE plus living at the federal poverty number. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, I know you understand this, but the federal poverty number, FPL, is a fixed number, a fixed calculation based on nothing more than the number of people who live under the same roof. Doesn't matter where that roof is. It doesn't matter whether the roof is in Sandpoint or Sand Hollow, Idaho, for those of you who even know where Sand Hollow is, or whether it's Coeur d'Alene or Cary or Manhattan or Melba, it doesn't matter. It's just simply a calculation that hasn't been updated almost since it was invented in the 60s. The cost of living advances with it a bit, not a lot, but a bit, but the actual number doesn't change. So what the ALICE data does is calculates for us in Idaho, right down to our census tract, what it actually costs to live at a very just basic survival level. And then how many people at a census tract or a county or a city earn $1 more than the federal poverty number for their household, but not enough to survive right where they live at their street address. So for us in Idaho, it's 40% of the state. It varies widely on where you live, but nobody, no zip code, no county, no city in the state of Idaho is less than a third, is less than 33%, which is pretty shocking when you start and think about how many people that represents. And the simple reality is that every single one of us knows Alice. If you would please, ma'am. So a couple of little pieces of information. One of the things we can do with our Alice data is track it over time. Carrie alluded to the fact that we've been doing this now for a few years. So we have 3 reports that we can look back on. And over the course of time for us here in Idaho, our poverty numbers, those folks living at the federal poverty level or below, has actually gone down a little bit. That's good. So post-recession, we were starting to make some progress. Our Alice number, however, has gone up. And here's how that's happening. It is happening from folks who were living at the technical definition of poverty, moving up, advancing their family income. That's good. That's the right direction. But more recently, it was happening from families who were stable, moving backwards. And that's where the gap is materializing. It's from above falling backwards to instability, largely because of the cost of childcare and housing in Idaho, and some families actually advancing, which is a good thing. That tells us some of our work has been really well invested. So thank you for that. Go ahead, please. So the Alice population numbers are also moving. The cost of being Alice, the cost of struggling, is actually outpacing the consumer price index, which is kind of the baseline that economists use across the nation to track the affordability. But what this tells us is that the true affordability for us across the country, and specifically here in Idaho, is greater, is advancing faster than the nation actually recognizes based on a traditional benchmark. Go ahead, please. So for us here in Idaho, just to, again, to kind of, before we dig into the details here, it doesn't matter where you live, whether you live in one of the metropolitan areas or whether you are in our most rural parts of the state, our Alice numbers are growing. So this applies pretty universally across the state here in Idaho. Very please. Okay. Idaho's booming. You all know that. We've seen the headlines. We've been reading it in our media. We know that's the case, but the truth is that it is not booming for everybody. The pandemic has particularly made equity a challenge and something that we are talking much more about, but the Alice numbers and data has given us this equity conversation for a long time now. I'm going to talk a little bit more down the road about the impact of our border states and income, and it definitely applies for North Idaho, where you pretty much share a border with Washington all the way across your service area. But the fact that Idaho has not changed our base wage since 2009, which was the last time that the federal minimum wage was changed, and it wasn't changed by much, means that our Alice workers are not even close to being able to bring into their household, even if they're making more than minimum wage, and most of them do, it still isn't enough to compete. And the pressure along our border states is pretty significant. Just a note, the Washington and Oregon minimum wage or base wages went up by $1 each in July, so already these numbers are out of date. If you would, please. So a couple of sort of baseline context here before we get into the budget, because food matters. Idaho has more food desert locations than we have ever had. That's a designation that the USDA provides. We are an ag state, and yet we are not feeding our families. So for food costs have gone up almost 50% in the last few years. And of course, housing is something that's on everybody's mind. Just in the last 2 years, almost 25% increase in housing. And it doesn't matter where you are. Housing prices have gone up. The cost of rentals have gone up even more because of outbound burden and because of our difference in wages along our border communities. And I'll come back to that again in a few minutes. So Carrie, please. Okay, I mentioned that Idaho is a food desert, but that's not the only desert that we are. And I hate to sound like Debbie Downer here, but we have some big issues up and down the state. We have a shortage of healthcare providers. Officially, the whole state now is considered a healthcare desert. And obviously, the further you are from an urban center where our health tends to be hubbed, the harder it is. But we're also hearing extensively from very specific populations within Alice, senior citizens, for example, even seniors who live within our urban centers are having a hard time accessing healthcare because healthcare providers may not be taking new patients. They may not be taking patients who are elderly, meaning that they don't take Medicare. Our LGBTQIA community really struggles in Idaho to find healthcare that is appropriate for them. And our Hispanic communities really struggles to find healthcare that is appropriate for them as well. We are also a childcare desert. You know more than anyone because your entire community is so appropriately focused on childcare needs and the complexities of childcare, particularly during the pandemic. But more than 50% of the state doesn't have access to childcare in sufficient numbers to meet the needs of workers, and that is only going to get worse. Go ahead, please. Okay, so let's go back and start actually getting into the numbers. And if you have questions, feel free to dump them into the chat, and Carrie and April and gang will stop me as we go along. And I am going to move pretty quickly to be mindful of your time, but if there's something you'd like to chat about, feel free to stop me as we go. I said at the outset that 40% of Idaho's households in the aggregate are struggling, but it really doesn't apply equally. So this gives you just a random collection of counties up and down the state to show you kind of how it varies by state. And even more specifically, this data gets into how it varies by city and then how it varies by census tract, because even within a particular community, there could be a census tract that is deeply, deeply Alice, right next to a census tract that has a relatively modest amount of Alice. And you could probably start to think about housing and where people live in your community and start to draw some of those assumptions. Both our highest and lowest Alice populations are over in the eastern corner of the state. So to test your geography, both Clark County and Jefferson County are the far eastern corner of the state, bumping up against Montana. Carrie, please. Thank you very much. So this is the heart and soul of the Alice data. The way that we can compare and determine how many folks in a specific location how they're doing basically is based on this budget. So this budget considers absolute basics. This is, you'll notice up there, it says survival budget. This is a budget that really just keeps folks afloat. There's no savings built into this. There's no extra vehicle. There's certainly no vacation. There's no school supplies for the kiddos. There's no rainy day built into this, which is one of the reasons why when I said at the outset, Alice was fragile before the pandemic, Alice didn't have savings. So it's not baked into the budget. So we're taking into consideration housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, because we do live in healthcare's mandated, technology, which means one very modest smartphone, miscellaneous, which is 10% of everything above the miscellaneous lines, taxes, because Alice works, and then what the monthly household income would be by composition, what the annual income would be, and what that breaks back down to in terms of an hourly wage. Remember, this is to survive. So this is the state in aggregate. And you're probably already looking at the housing number. Everybody goes right to that line and says, holy moly, I'd be thrilled if I could find housing at that price point. So remember, this is an aggregate number for the state. We'll dive into your region here in just a minute. I would note that while these are the pre-prescribed, if you will, household compositions, you can add, subtract, and make up your own within the context of the live report. You can look at a senior living with 2 kids, for example, so kin care. You can make up the budgets that work for you as appropriate. Carrie, if you would, please. Yeah. So housing and childcare across the state, without exception, in every single geography, those are the two areas that have the most pressure. So for our families that need childcare, we already are in a deficit situation. You heard me say that in terms of the volume of childcare, and affordability is as much a part of the challenge as available slots. So across the state, childcare, this is flipped since our previous report, childcare is as expensive or more expensive in most areas than housing. And we know housing is going up like crazy. So it's not just an affordability, it's also an inventory issue. We are way upside down on inventory for housing in Idaho. Carrie, please. Okay, so this is Kootenai County. So you notice you're familiar now with the template here. You get how the game is played. You can see that looking, for example, at the 2 adult, 2 children, kind of that middle column, your housing costs have gone up compared to the state. Your childcare costs went up. Your food costs went up. Transportation's about the same as the state average. Healthcare is a little bit more expensive. Technology is about the same. So that drives up your miscellaneous and the annual income. Remember, this is to survive, not to thrive, just to survive. Carrie, please. So looking at a neighboring county, you can see how things start to shift. A little bit more affordability, not much, but a little bit more affordability in the housing market. Childcare stays high because there are very few available slots. Food actually is kind of comparable, and everything else is relatively similar. So now you can start to see how the budgets compare county to county. And if you were to dive down into census tract, you would see even greater variation. Carrie, please. Oops. Okay. So I want to pause on this one. One of the reasons that this ALICE budget is so important and has been so incredibly helpful in our investment decision making, in our advocacy, helping to find our voice with policymakers, is this very simple concept for us in Idaho. And remember, I said Idaho's booming. That's like a no duh thing, or at least it was before the pandemic. But when it comes to everybody's budget, but most specifically Alice's, rent eats first. And so as our housing prices have gone up and up and up, that means everything else other than housing becomes negotiable. How much we eat, the quality of what we eat, whether we can afford school supplies, whether we can feed the dog, whether we can put gas in the car to get to work, everything else becomes negotiable based off this. And this cartoon is actually from 1894, ironically, based on a union dispute on the East Coast. Carrie, please. So remember I said that the ALICE budget is framed on a survival budget. This is Bonner County. And I'd like for you to go down to the bottom there and look at 2 adults, 2 in childcare. So the 1, 2, 3, 4th column over, and put your mind on the annual total that the household needs and what that equates to in terms of an hourly wage, however it's cobbled together, whether that's one earner earning that or 2 earners working 4 jobs between them. So put those 2 numbers in your memory box. And remember, this is a survival budget, but we don't want people to just survive. We would like them to be stable and ultimately to thrive. So Carrie, take us forward, please. So this is the stability budget, because within this, we want to look forward. And you can see that the numbers just about doubled. Now we've moved them to stability, but you'll still notice there's no fluff built into this budget. There's no vacation home, there's no jet skis, there's no boat, there's no vacation. This is more stable housing, usually moving them from renting to asset building, so some sort of ownership. Childcare, where it's appropriate, actually gets better because ironically, as you grow in stability, you have greater access to resources for childcare. Food goes up substantially because now you're not living on top ramen and pantry support, frankly. Transportation goes up because we've added a second vehicle that actually runs, and we built in a little bit of money to maintain that vehicle, not a lot, but the occasional new battery, keeping up with oil changes, those sorts of things that keep it running. Healthcare remains relatively stable. Technology goes up just a little bit, but you'll notice, I don't know about you, but $145 for technology would still be less than I'm paying right now for 2 cell phones at my house. Miscellaneous goes up because that's a calculation, but now we've added savings and just a really modest amount of savings. So now we're allowing that Alice could maybe retire someday, that Alice could weather a pandemic if need be, that Alice has the resources to manage a health crisis, etc. And you can see that the number just to go to stability, not to lead an extravagant lifestyle, but it doubles the amount of resources that the family needs to develop. If you would, please. Okay, I mentioned earlier that the border state influence is really a big deal for Alice, and that is absolutely true. And I know that those of you who are right up against the border are feeling this. We certainly are feeling it here with our border with Oregon. Their policies influence Alice's success in Idaho. Increasingly, and you know this, Alice goes across the state where she can earn more, and yet she's maybe living still in Idaho, which means that her taxes are going to Washington, her wage employment taxes are going to Washington. Idaho doesn't have the benefit of that, but she's using Idaho services, infrastructure, perhaps social services, food, etc. So we're finding this outbound migration of talent in order to create a sustainable wage. And that is setting up a really important challenge for our policymakers as we go forward. For us down here, and it may also be true for you, we're also seeing the influence of the access to recreational marijuana along the policy states having a huge impact on risky behavior by youth. And that is something that we have really been watching and monitoring closely for our United Way, because Oregon, Ontario is just about 40 miles away, and it's really easy to send your older brother or sister across to buy your favorite cannabis-laced product and bring it back into Idaho. So we're seeing some really interesting policy conflicts as we think about financial stability and as we think about our health interests. Carrie, if you would, please. Okay, just a couple of little additional notes for you here. I'll do these pretty quickly. Of the occupations that are primarily supplied by Alice wage workers, a significant portion of them are very likely to be automated in the coming years. So they're likely to go, jobs are likely to go away. So think particularly about bank and financial, so tellers, for example. Think about manufacturing, even some of our ag and dairy is increasingly becoming automated. So there's less need for workers. So we have some interesting thoughts to be thinking forward about how we ensure that Alice continues to be an important part of our economy, and we move Alice towards stability as her job situation may change. If you would, please. Okay, so just again for my data geeking friends, this Alice report also has some really fun features if you want to play with them. So one of the features is you can map resources or assets based in your community. And this one happens to show Fremont County over in the eastern corner of the state and the location of libraries, so public libraries who have become, boy, they've taken on a powerful role in this pandemic, access to internet, broadband, mobile learning, etc. So you can map your Alice population relative to things like libraries, or Carrie, go ahead, please. This gives you again that second look. And you'll notice that resources tend to be really tightly located, which means they're not necessarily available to Alice. More food for thought for us. Go ahead, please. Internet, something that we care a lot about now that our kiddos and our workers are, some workers are working from home, but particularly with remote learning. So this report will also tell you what percentage of Alice workers and those living in poverty have access to internet. So in this case, Benewah County, 68% of Alice and below have access to internet, which means about 30% don't. Doesn't mean it's stable necessarily, and it might consist of mom's phone being the hotspot, which probably leaves the house every day. So more for us to think about there. Go ahead, please. And again, you can find out how you rank in relation to others. This is internet access by county relative to other communities across the United States. Go ahead, please. Okay, so we're kind of winding down now, and I know this particular slide's a bit of an eye chart, but I'd like you to take a minute and think about this. This is really why we care about Alice. Alice is so important to not just our friends, families, and our communities, but really to our state. So for the first time, the Alice report calculates what it would actually look like financially to the state of Idaho if our Alice workers, or most of them, moved from that survival budget that you saw up to the stability budget that you also saw. So if we can make that shift, if we can help Alice go from survivability to thrivability, if I can make up a word here, what does it mean to the state of Idaho? Well, it's $16.5 billion per year added to Idaho's GDP. That is enormous. That's how important it is for us to wrap our hearts and our heads around helping Alice. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't just help people, which is of course what we care about, but it helps those things that the politicians care about, and that's the financial resources of our state. Carrie, if you would, please. So a couple things that are really obvious, but Alice needs to have her voice heard. So what can we do for Alice? Well, we can think about equity in all that we do, and equity is not the same as equality. It's not spreading the peanut butter as you think about your work. The purpose of this call, it's not spreading the peanut butter as thinly as we possibly can and just hoping everybody gets a little. It's really about being mindful of putting the resources where they do the most good and where they are needed the most. It also means that we should think about health, education, and financial stability not as three separate pillars, but more like layers of a cake. The best way to get all the good flavors is to cut the cake through all the layers and the frosting. And that means that understanding that social influencers or social determinants of health include education. It includes access to childcare. It includes transportation. It's not just what happens. Health is not just determined based on the time you spend in a clinical office. It's that co-mingling of all of the parts of our lives. The more that resources can co-locate, the stronger Alice gets, and the more we can be creative about getting resources to where Alice is. So think about that chart that showed you where the libraries were all populated and how much space didn't have a library. Thinking about how we can get creative to get the resources that Alice needs the most near to where Alice can actually get the resources is super important. Carrie, please. So some of the things that create opportunities for us here, the idea of community schools and the growing vocation of community health workers is something that we can think about inspiring and continuing to support. And being mindful just in our activities that work hours aren't the same for everybody. And so one size does not fit all for things like childcare, et cetera. We got to start thinking about housing and getting people housed before we worry about some of the other services. And that as we think about our opportunities to expand transportation networks and think more creatively about how we build communities, this is the long game, but it really matters for us here in Idaho. If you would, please. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to back to the lovely Miss Carrie. And if you take us one more slide, for those of you that didn't catch the website address, there you go. You can get in there and tromp around and have all sorts of fun learning and exploring This data has been used to attract millions of dollars in out-of-state grants for organizations all over the state. So in addition to the resources you have to invest, this data is specifically being used by nonprofits all over the state to advance advocacy efforts, to drive policy efforts, but more specifically to attract additional resources. And so thank you, United Way of North Idaho, for being part of this.
And thank you, Nora, for sharing your time and insights with us. I really love how you're able to create a compelling narrative and tell a story around Alice with that data. Do you have a few minutes if anybody has any questions?
Be my pleasure.
So please, if you have any questions or comments, observations, things that surprised you from Nora's presentation, please feel welcome right now to unmute or put something in the chat. It is a really great platform to use, that United for Alice. We do have a question here. So, oh, Arwen just says great data. Thank you so much. All right. Well, Nora, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Oh, wait a sec. I might have one more. Oh, workforce housing is a big issue again, and that's very, very true. So that's from Marie Price. She's one of our board members and works with Idaho Forest Group. So, you know, seeing a lot of that very historical, deeply based blue collar work in Idaho is the timber and logging industry. And I'm sure that workforce housing is a big issue there as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nora. Again, I appreciate your time and all of the work that you're doing and mobilizing and inspiring the leaders in your community and being a part of that. It's honor to have you here, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Keep up the great work, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, guys, so we are going to bop back over to my slideshow. And all right, so I've got two folks in the wings here. I am only seeing a tiny screen of my own. So kind of wanting to bring it back into more of our local level and what we've been seeing. I've invited Sam Tushkan and Chris Keim to join us here and share just some of the observations that they have made, what they're seeing in our communities of the impacts of COVID on local families and specifically on local Alice families. So do we have Sam on?
Hi, Carrie.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm good. So this is a loose share. So go ahead if you want to talk about the childcare issues. You've been doing a lot of work on that. Whatever you feel is relevant to this conversation.
Okay, so Carrie asked me to come on and just kind of share with you guys what has happened with COVID and the impact of on our childcare as well as the families with Alice. And so like Nora said, Alice was fragile prior to COVID, and now it's even more highlighted that. So same with childcare, because childcare, many of our workers are Alice families and many of our owners are Alice families. So childcare was super fragile prior to COVID, and COVID has highlighted the fragility of childcare and has shown the light that childcare is super fragile and needs lots of support to get through. So when the shutdown happened with COVID, 75 of our childcares in Region 1 ended up having to close their doors due to lack of enrollment, the inability to have enough funds to remain open, and weren't sure if they were going to be able to open back up when the shutdown ended. Luckily, all but 4 programs of those 75, and we just the total number, we have 178 child cares total in Region 1. All but 4 programs were able to reopen as of now. 4 programs did have to permanently close, but when they reopened, right now, the majority of them, 50 to 75% capacity is what they're operating at because of social distancing and making sure that they're being able to implement the COVID protocols to be able to ensure children and families are safe. So how that impacts families is great because our families aren't able to access care as easily, And so then that affordability piece gets in the way, because many programs, 25% of those programs that are open did have to raise the cost of care as well. So as you saw from Nora's slides, care is already an expensive thing for our families, especially Alice families. And if 25% of those programs that are open had to raise those costs to be able to afford having decreased enrollment, as well as the things they had to purchase, such as cleaning supplies, gloves, stuff like that, that was another impact on families that wasn't expected. So the other thing, as COVID continued, was schools either being opened in a blended model or closed altogether. When COVID shutdown happened, schools stopped running their what's called the base program or GAP, depending on where you are, School Plus. They stopped running that and only did it for emergency childcare. So our school age kids not only didn't have school to go to, but didn't have that school care to have for working families. And then many of our childcares in Region 1 don't offer a before and after school type of program. So then now school come fall in a blended model, or they're still closed, many families were left trying to find childcare. So that was a big concern and a cost that they normally don't have. So that we, as United Way, had a lot of schools reaching out to us saying, how do we help these families? So there was Croc Center was able to help the school, Coeur d'Alene specific, with doing care for their staff. And then Boys and Girls Club has offered a program at a minimal fee for families for school age care, but that still is a continued concern for families. Luckily this week, there's some change in the operations for the Coeur d'Alene schools, and Lakeland schools have been open. So hopefully that will alleviate some of the concern. But with the unknown of COVID, and if they'll have to flip-flop back and forth between orange or red as things go, that's just an ongoing concern with this pandemic of families having that cost of care. So we've luckily gained some funds from the city of Coeur d'Alene to be able to offer scholarships for families of the low to moderate income. So we're working on putting together that specific scholarship for Coeur d'Alene families, as well as we have an additional fund for families outside of the city of Coeur d'Alene to offer for Alice specific families. But that cost of care has really been impactful for families. And for childcare providers, we've been able to offer some grants because childcare providers have been fearful of having to close their doors because, like I said, they too are Alice families, and they are fearful of having to close their doors if they have COVID in their programs, and they've had to close for a week or 2 weeks, depending on quarantines, and also the cost of the materials that they're having to keep up on in their programs. So that's kind of the impact that we've seen of COVID so far, and many of the programs just holding on because that low impact right now, or the low enrollment right now, impacting their ability to maintain business. Carrie, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you. I see you talking, but
Oh, how's that?
there we go. Now I
Better?
can.
Okay,
Mhm.
I had to put my headphones in. So we've been able, through the preschool development grant, through the Idaho AYC, to collect actual data on the inventory and price of childcare. And what we found is that the childcare programs that are in operation are not running at capacity. So that may not, in our area, be the only issue or the biggest challenge for families accessing that care, but rather the cost of care. And again, as Sam mentioned, that cost is already difficult to reach on an Alice budget or below. But providers are also seeing a need to increase their costs because of increased cleaning supplies, lower enrollment, so higher ratios. And so it's kind of a pressure point from multiple sides. And we know that childcare is, hey guys, can you keep it down? Family, so. Childcare is an infrastructure and not just an industry. Without it, people can't get to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is exciting news that with the work that we've done through the preschool development grant, like Carrie said, we had a survey for parents to find out what was your biggest barrier, and one of the largest barriers was cost. The survey that we've done with providers Typically providers have wait lists. We're not seeing those wait lists right now. So, which is an impact to providers because they're not having the normal enrollment like they normally do. So they, like Carrie said, we have those openings in childcares. So they're not getting the funds like normal, but we do know school age is an area of concern. So we've been able to go to the city. I'm a child care commissioner. So we've been able to go to the city and have them look at, think outside of the box. How can we support our childcare infrastructure right now? And they're actually going to the council tonight to potentially allow temporary emergency childcare licenses, which support businesses. So if businesses were looking at having a conference room that had age 4 to school age childcare, to where they can have parents not have to pay for childcare, but have their children come in and do schoolwork during the day. So just other ways. So although COVID has been a huge financial impact for families, it's also allowed for outside the box thinking and hopefully to move our childcare forward with some great opportunities to really help families in the long run.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie.
And then Chris Keim, are you on, Chris?
Yes, I am.
All right. So Chris Keim is with Advanced Benefits. He's been on the United Way board for several years now and is also the newest chair of the ALICE task force. So I asked Chris to join us again for sort of an informal share about the observations he's made as we meet monthly, the ALICE task force, and there's a lot of community-based organizations that are coming around the table for that. So Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, as Carrie alluded to, the ALICE Task Force is a collection of community members that work to connect the community with resources with those that are in need for resources. And we highlight these community resources in a monthly community bulletin called the Helps Bulletin. A few general shares from our past few meetings is one is nonprofit agencies have seen a reduction in people accessing services. There's lots of great resources that are available, but the reduction is either due to people not leaving their homes as much as they were, or people are just assuming that everyone's trying to access resources, therefore there must be a shortage. But just in general, the nonprofits have shared that we're seeing a reduction in the amount of people coming in for assistance and help. So we're trying to promote and educate and let the community know that those resources are still available. What's been mentioned by Nora and Samantha again, and what we hear quite a bit within the ALICE Task Force is childcare still is the #1 struggle for most ALICE communities. So some of that has increased due to the adjustments to school schedules. The other thing is if grandma and grandpa were once relied on for childcare, and maybe that is not an option due to COVID vulnerabilities. So childcare is a #1 thing that we hear, as well as affordable housing. That was mentioned as well, and that continues to climb as a stressor or as an area of need as we see an influx of people moving into the area, people moving from Washington over to this area for a number of reasons that, we're seeing that need climb as well. So a couple of things the task force is working on to really try to get a better indication on where we can most help. The task force right now is mainly made up of nonprofit agencies. And so we're working to partner with HRNNI, which is a group of HR leaders, to gain more insight from the HR perspective on the ALICE community needs. And the other thing that we're doing is for years, we've produced more of a paper helps bulletin that goes on a bulletin board for the ALICE community members. And we're moving to an electronic version, to help with those that maybe are working remotely, and B, probably the bigger impact or value of the electronic helps bulletin is we'll be able to gain insight on what people are looking for, because we'll be able to track clicks. So when people go in to access the electronic helps bulletin and maybe they click on a resource that's available, we can track those clicks. And so we can see, you know, what's driving people to what resource. And then we can, as a task force, look for those opportunities or look for ways for us to increase areas of resources for those that are in need. So just a couple things that I wanted to mention there from the Alice Task Force. That's it, Carrie, from me.
Thank you, Chris. And I know that there has been sort of an interesting evolution of what resources are available because of COVID. And so there's some federal dollars that have come down to support renters, as well as, of course, the stimulus, which is probably gone for most people now. But there's really been a great response among that group, I would say, in terms of adapting and trying to, well, understand first and adapt to the needs of the community. So just echoing what Chris said, we continue to seek network partners to share the information resources that that we're learning through this task force of how we can support Alice. Thank you both. I appreciate that. Any questions for Chris or Sam at this time? All right, I will move forward then, if I can. Oh, there we go. All right, so here, our next, the next phase of our agenda here is reviewing the impact goals and strategies. So again, these are listed in not as graphic of a form, but on a PDF sort of long form on your EC Impact volunteer site. As I showed you earlier. And so one of the tasks for the council members, for everybody that is participating today, is to confirm with me prior to that October 1 opening of the evaluations, which council you would like to be affiliated with. So most of the folks who have come back from past years, I know which councils you'd like to be on. But if there are any changes, or if you don't yet have a council affiliation, that's really important for us so that we can make sure that we've got reviewers and that we're asking you or requesting that you review impact areas and applications for which you have a passion or an expertise. And so you can see on the left side here are the impact areas: education, financial stability, and health. And as of 2018, we did split that education into two. So we have school readiness and then youth success. So again, that's highlighting our increased focus as a united way in collaboration with community partners on early care and education, childcare, and that transition into kindergarten. And then youth success kind of goes beyond that, probably about from second or third grade forward into the 18, 19, 20 year olds. So in the middle, the goals here are articulated. And then on the far right column, we have our investment priorities, or basically how we're going to go about achieving the goals. And so these are sort of broad, but also provide some guidance both for our applicants as well as our reviewers. So like so many in our community and in our nation, we're looking very closely at diversity, equity, and inclusion as beyond just a statement or a checkbox that we have for our organization, and more as a practice, and how we're looking very critically at ourselves as an organization and using our position of privilege and power, being a funder, to promote equity and social justice and inclusion in our communities. And so this is our statement. And I wanted to go over these, and I think this is an important piece of how we're moving forward. And it's another one of these pieces of our work that is continuous improvement. So the statement that we had previously, and this has been wordsmithed a little bit over the last couple of months to be more proactive and intentional. Our statement is that United Way of North Idaho is committed to being intentionally inclusive in every aspect of our work. We seek to include representation from all communities in decision-making and funding opportunities, including individuals of any race, ethnicity, social or economic background, disability, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We aspire to live in an inclusive community where all individuals have access to resources and opportunity for quality of life. So that's our statement. But we've also developed, with the help of our colleagues and our board and outside consultants and people who have a lot more knowledge and experience with this than we do, to really break it down into what we're doing in a proactive and ongoing basis. And so these are really important to us, as well as bringing along the volunteers like you that we work with, the partner agencies, the people who are working on the ground, and using, as I mentioned, our privilege to promote policy, systems, and environment that are equitable and just for everybody in our community. So we've bulleted out here: unlearning our implicit biases, relearning our nation and our state's most honest history, listening to and amplifying the voices of those experiencing disenfranchisement in our community, and leveraging our privilege as a community voice to stand as a strong ally in the effort to dismantle systemic racism and the many other systems of oppression that are upheld by our community. We seek to embrace an intersectional lens. We work to demonstrate these intentions through our decision-making, our funding opportunities, and our equal opportunity employment. Our DEI policies and practice apply to the entirety of our organization, including our staff, volunteers, board members, and all of the programs and agencies with which we work. And starting in 2021, we'll require funded agencies to provide evidence of their own diversity, equity, and inclusion practice. We've put into place anonymous reporting of exclusionary practices by our organization, and those, well, they can be anonymous if they're sent via the mail. Otherwise, they can be sent to our executive director, Mark. A note here is that targeted services are not considered discrimination, but we want to be very accountable. We want to be very transparent, and we want to be proactive in our efforts as an organization that is a funder and a convener, that we're being very intentional in this practice. So this is another thing that once we have it finalized with our board and our staff trainings, that this will also be a resource that's available to view and explore on the reviewer resources on the EC Impact website. Any questions or comments at this point? All right, so here, so this is certainly a refresh for many of you, but the impact councils, who we are right now, you are the volunteers who guide our community care fund investments, and that is a very strong point of pride and transparency, again, that we as United Way hold high, that it's not just our staff or just our board that are making these investment decisions with the community dollars that are invested and entrusted with us. We take a lot of pride in your participation and grassroots community that comes together and shares the knowledge and experience to make those sound investment recommendations. What we seek from you is active participation in reviewing those applications, the discussions and deliberation. As I mentioned at the top, this is a learning community. And so whether you're new to the council or you've been on it for a decade, you are bringing knowledge and experience, and we're all learning together. We ask that you maintain independence and objectivity and keep an eye towards meeting unmet needs or gaps, investing in areas, programs, services that are bridging gaps in services for our community, looking at where the true struggle is. And that's why we spend a lot of time talking about Alice and the obstacles that are maybe not always apparent. We ask that you disclose conflicts of interest and that you maintain confidentiality. So now into the nitty gritty here. So the fall 2020 schedule, we are in fall right now. So today is our council orientation, of course. If you missed it at the top, this orientation will be recorded. So if at any point you want to go back and review anything, I'll also send the slide deck along with our follow-up. So if you have any questions or forget the timeline, you can look back here. There's also a timeline on your volunteer site. So 2 days from now, September 30th, 11:59 p.m., all the applications are due. And since we have a new platform now that doesn't require me to download and re-upload and do all kinds of weird things with PDFs, those will be immediately available to you to review. So October 1st, you will have your assignments for the applications that you'll be reviewing according to your impact area. So to add context, in order for an agency to apply, they have to select an impact area for which they're applying. So once all those are in, I filter them out and make sure that if you're in the Financial Stability Impact Council, you're only reviewing financial stability applications. So October 14th is the round 1 scoring deadline. So that's when you need to have that first level of evaluations done after you filled out your evaluation scorecard for each of the assigned applications that will be on your site. The reason for that deadline is that October 15th is when the Finance Committee meets. And so we want to have the applications that your council is recommending to go on to a finance review and a site visit, that all those are ready to go. You may find in your reviewing, as is always the case, I think with every single grantor out there, that the requests far outpace the dollars available. We anticipate a similar pool of funds available to the councils, which for all 3 councils is about $100,000 divided more or less equally. And again, I will have those specific numbers for you on October 1st when you start evaluating. But you may find in your evaluations that there are some applications that simply are not a good fit. Maybe the program is not ready to be funded. There's a number of reasons why you may decline to advance an application to the next round. And that's all done again with that group consensus. So October 15th. So once you have all of your evaluations complete and submitted, you won't need to do anything on your end as long as all those are complete. I will collect all the information for the finance review and provide that to our finance committee. Often in the finance reviews, additional questions will come up when our committee reviews their 990 up against their budget. And so that October 15th to November 30th, that's kind of your final leg of the race. So if there are questions that come up from the finance committee, we'll ask those directly to the organization. And you'll be doing sort of your more in-depth deliberations, site visits. We highly recommend virtual site visits for the obvious reason that it allows people to be safely distanced. It can also allow more participants in some cases. So I think some of our veteran council members can speak to sort of the awkwardness that sometimes comes if you're going on a site visit to interview a program director and there's maybe 4 or 5 council members. It can kind of be overwhelming for that program director. But if we're Zooming, that may be a little bit less intimidating. If there is a case where the program and the council agree that an on-site visit would be best in order to maybe view the facility, then that is something that we are urging the utmost caution, masking and physical distancing, and doing it in a way that promotes the safety for everybody involved. And again, would definitely endorse a virtual site visit in lieu of an on-site, just so that everybody is safe. So then between that time, you'll be making notes, visiting with your council members, and having a final deliberation. So prior to this November 30th date, when everything needs to be prepared for the board of directors, you'll have a final meeting with your councils, and your council chairs will be facilitating and coordinating those meetings, as well as the board liaisons, to have, really break down, okay, we have these, say, 5 or 6 organizations that are really strong that we want to recommend. What's our recommendation amount? Any final thoughts, questions, considerations need to be completed by that point, before the councils submit a consensus recommendation to the board of directors. The board very, very, very strongly trusts the recommendation of the impact councils. They trust that you have all done your due diligence. And so it very often there is a little bit of discussion, but the trust and the rapport is really with you council members, and the history that you have in making these recommendations, and doing that work to really ensure that, again, the investments that we're making are with the sound organizations that are making an impact where it's most needed. And December 1st is the final board meeting for the calendar year for United Way. So that December 1st date, they will vote on those recommendations, and between December 1st and December 30th, we will notify the organizations that have been selected for funding. We'll acquire the documentation that we need from them. They have a couple of things they need to return to us, such as their counterterrorism compliance form, which is a Patriot Act piece that we're required to have, any W-9s for payment, things like that. So any questions on that schedule? Okay. So now, and feel free, this is a great time to think about unmuting and adding in any ideas or experience that you have, whether you are a veteran council member from United Way, or if you've done reviewing of applications with other organizations. This is sort of what I've gleaned in working with you impact council members over the past couple of years as what is a good way to go through this. But again, you're the experts here. So as I mentioned, we were looking at the evaluation scorecard. It's a good idea to read through, make notes, and then go back with the evaluation scorecard, getting that kind of big picture first, making notes, submitting questions if needed. One of the things that our platform is able to do is we can generate reports that may help you in your council deliberations. And so I'm working with our council chairs, so Roy Ely in the Health Impact Council and Sherry Dickinson in the Financial Stability Council, to determine what is going to be helpful for the councils in making those decisions. So if you want to see an aggregate of the total requests, if you want to see the requests by impact area, if you want to see the average scores, if you want to see a score by reviewer, all of those, a variety of reports are available to get a picture, and slicing and dicing the data that we have through the applications to get a good picture of what you're working with and help you make a good decision. The site visits, as I mentioned, that's kind of a last step for one of the last steps for the evaluation process. The finance committee makes notes, and so they will have questions. They may have questions for us to dig into, for you to dig into when you're visiting with the agencies that you'd like to advance. It's a good idea to prepare your questions in advance. We have a site visit form that's available to you if you'd like, and I'll put that on your volunteer review site as well. Schedule directly with the agency contact. Certainly let them know if you want to meet with other personnel or see specific programs. So for some of our agencies, it'll be the executive director or the development director that is writing the grant, but there may be someone else that's running the program that you'd want to visit with around specific things. And I think I can speak for the council in saying that the site visits and interviews with program directors and other staff is really a very important part in understanding the nuance of programs and agencies that's hard to capture in an application, that it's a very useful process in really understanding holistically what these agencies and programs are doing. Finally, I just have a couple more slides here and wanted to touch on what I have borrowed the term from another foundation of the natural tensions. So in your organizational, or excuse me, in your council reviews, these tend to arise when we're looking at 30 as of now programs that are doing important work. We have limited resources and can't fund all of them. So how do we come to terms with that? What are the tensions? So this might be a good slide to go back to when you're thinking about or asking critical questions in your evaluation process. Does the council want to fund a larger number of small grants, or a larger number of small grants, or a smaller number of large grants? Do you think it's impactful to fund something that has a very deep engagement with a few citizens, or has maybe a lesser level of engagement but a larger population? What is the impact, the scale of the impact for the project? What is the scale of the impact for the organization? I think something that we take pride in as United Way is being able to support salaries and operating expenses that may be challenging to get from other organizations that are funders. We know that supporting your quote unquote overhead is a really critical piece in a successful organization. So you have to have good staff to operate your programs. You need to have technology. You got to be able to pay your rent in your building. There's also capacity building logic with that. And so I'll call out a specific program that is an applicant. It's a home visiting program that's applying for Surface Pros for their home visiting staff, and the program manager called and said, I don't know quite how to frame this, and is this applicable? And so I kind of talked through, will this help? Will this expenditure? Will these laptops help your program staff do their job more efficiently or more effectively? Will that help your program in the long run? And can you make the case for it? And sometimes that capacity building can be a salaried position. Maybe it is a part-time program manager or a volunteer coordinator or something to that effect, where it may not be a direct program or a direct service program, but it could be something that builds the overall capacity of the organization to be more effective and efficient. Another thing worth looking at, and we've been able to break this down into more specific or more illustrative terms in the application budget, is where their restricted funds are versus unrestricted funds. So some of the organizations that apply may receive, for example, federal funding, but it may be very specific to like shelter, and they may not have funds. So their budget could show that they're, a $4 or $5 million organization, but that is already allocated to something pretty structural, and they may be asking for funds in the area of maybe programming or prevention or case management or any of those things. So it's important to kind of look at that and think about it, and not simply make a judgment about their need for funds on big dollar amounts that may be coming from restricted sources. So finally, this sort of gets into a little bit of what Nora mentioned of this social ecological model, or the social influence model of health, in terms of getting beyond programming and into how we are using our investments to work upstream, where possible, and to prevent issues, or prevent struggle, prevent crisis. Certainly, we know that there's always a need for safety net services, and that's even more apparent now in the time of a pandemic than ever before. We really need to, people need to have that basic level of survival. But I think it's helpful in our work, in my own work, and in our collaborative work to think about different levels of impact and influence, and how we might be able to use our investments, as I mentioned, to build the capacity of our whole community, and how they are interlocked and interwoven with each other. So how might investing in, for example, school programming benefit health access to a family? Or how might a collaboration between a school and a church food pantry create a more ready environment for I don't know, mentoring or volunteering, and just really thinking about how in our community our networks do influence each other, that we are stronger when we work together, and there are areas where we can influence maybe the availability of healthy choices, the availability of resources for helping children's education. If healthy choices, and I mean health in the broad sense, if healthy choices are readily available in our community, then our community members really have a better chance, obviously, of accessing and benefiting from those. And so just sort of thinking about the individual out to the public sphere is something that we use in our work. And I would encourage you to think about that as well as you're reading through these applications and considering the wisest use of our investment dollars to benefit our community's health, education, and financial stability opportunities. All right, so that at this point is the end of the slide show presentation. So I've just opened up my my screen here so I can see more people, and I'd really love to hear any questions that you might have. If Veteran Council members have tips and tricks, if you wanted to comment on anything you saw, this is the time for it.
Hey, Carrie, it's Miranda. I had a quick question.
Sure.
So the slide that you were showing, the inclusion, diversity, equity, the promises that United Way is looking to do. So I have two questions, actually. So number one, on all of those promises, I was just curious if there is action steps that are going to be with those that are already available, or if they're coming in the future. And then the second one is, let's see, it said June 2021 that there will be requirement of statements from the funded agencies. Will that come as far as like a requirement on the application, or like what does that look like? I was just curious of that piece too.
Yeah, great question, Miranda. Thank you for asking. So both of these are in progress. And so as an organization, our staff has been doing some internal DEI challenges, and that's sort of starting here of unlearning our implicit biases. I think that, and this is always the thing, right? Like we want to act more and talk less. So I think that all of these are statements that we came together and decided, yep, we can get behind these, and we want to push to understand, and where we can have action behind them, right? So to say each of these has an action item behind it, not yet. And that's the mindset of continuous improvement that we're working towards. We're doing staff training, we're doing board training. And actually that's an open call too. So open to, if you have resources, you have trainings, you've got insight that can help us. We really want to, oh, that's my son. We really want to embrace that and be open to learning as much as we can within, the framework of our community, which looks different than a lot of communities. And, we've got some skeletons in our closet, and I think I'm just prattling on right now. We want to learn as much as we can and be able to back that learning with concrete actions. So we want to know what other people are doing too. All right, so as far as the required statements, so new to the last couple of years is the requirement that agencies have an anti-discrimination policy, which are all the protected classes. And that's pretty standardized language. We are interested in funding and promoting organizations that are actively not just doing the bare minimum, I would say, but seeking to include, for example, voices of people that are often not at the table. That can be Alice, that can be people who are in ethnic or racial minorities, social economic disenfranchisement. We have started that with our designations. So there are some campaigns where individuals will designate to a specific organization, and we have created a policy that for transparency, we need to ensure that the dollars that we're at least managing as a baseline are not funding organizations that are in opposition to our inclusionary approach, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's so good. And I just, I'm so proud to be a part of an organization within our community that is seeing that it's an ongoing issue. And I love the idea that there's recognition that there are some things that need to change, and that there's at least a foundation of that change. I think that's great. Obviously, in our community, there's other organizations that are taking that pledge as well. So I would definitely encourage relationships, obviously they're already there, but just a reminder, I guess, with the Human Rights Education Institute, Love Lives Here campaign, all of that stuff, which myself and I know others that are on this call are already, a part of that. So if that could be helpful as far as relationship building or anything like that, definitely reach out. And so I'm just really excited to see that this is a stance that United Way is taking. And I hope that communication not just stops here within our group, but then, is elevated so that the entire community is aware that this is what we stand for, and that we are not only taking that stance for ourselves and our employees and volunteers, but then also expecting our community to follow suit. And I think that is just so, so important. So I think that's awesome. I guess I just wanted to go on record to say, so thank you. Yes, you did answer my questions.
Thanks, Miranda. And yeah, definitely with that communication piece, I think it is important to keep that rolling out, and it's not just an internal thing. So Scott had a question: is this approved by the board? Our draft, this is the draft policy, and so it will be approved by the board shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I guess sort of a housekeeping question. Does the navigation of the platform make sense to you? And I don't, you don't have to call yourself out if you don't feel comfortable, but that EC Impact platform, I think we selected it because it seemed pretty easy to use, and some of you have already used it in evaluating reports. But really important to me that that's not a heavy lift for you to get on and quickly go through and be able to find what you need and evaluate your assignments. It's been really clunky in the past.
Kiri, can you remind me what the company identifier is for logging in?
I believe it's 14030.
Thank you.
But I will also, again, in the follow-up, send the direct link that will take you to your volunteer side of that platform. So I will look to the community impact team for any additional comments or anything. So April, Chris, Wanda, Marie, we've got Sherry Dickinson, welcome, who is the Financial Stability Chair, and Roy Ely, new Chair of the Health Council. Any comments from you guys?
Carrie, it's Marie. Just wanted to say that I love the platform. I think it's very easy to navigate. Your explanation was great. Thank you for recording the seminar for those who want to go back and look through it. And I think it'll be a great and fair and equitable way of looking at all the applications that come in.
Awesome, that's good to hear.
And Carrie, this is Wanda. I do appreciate all the preparation you have put into this. This is a lot of work and significant changes, and appreciate all your efforts to put this together.
Thank you. Had a lot of help.
This is April, and I just want to thank all of the council members for all of their participation, for being a part of the orientation today, and for all the work that they put in and their investment to United Way.
Totally co-sign on that. We couldn't do this without you. And as I hope came across loud and clear, you really are such an important foundation to our investments and our ability to leverage change through dollars. You know, and Miranda, to your point, also, I think we vote with our dollars. We have influence with our dollars, and the community members who invest in United Way are voting on us or looking to see that transparency and that investment to improve community conditions for everybody. So it's you guys that are making that happen. So, all right, a couple of quick things just to wrap us up. I will, as I mentioned, send a follow-up with the link to not only video, but then just the slideshow. I can't send the video through email because it's too huge. I will send links to the EC Impact login, as well as the United for Alice website that Nora referenced. So that's like the big national page where you can get down into granular census level information. Be looking out for an email from or contact from your council chair. So we still currently have a vacancy for the education council chair. We have our board liaison, Wanda Quinn. We've got Chris Keim is our board liaison for the Health Impact Council, and Marie Price is our board liaison for financial stability. Roy Ely, as I mentioned, is our newest council chair for health. Welcome, Roy. And Sherry Dickinson is our newest council chair for financial stability. So welcome, Sherry. So be on the lookout for an email from those folks and or April and I to coordinate a time for your council to get together and review that first round of application evaluations. And if you have any questions at all or concerns or ideas, I want to emphasize also that I will have never arrived or peaked. So we want to always be improving the process. We've taken some huge leaps in making this an easier process for both applicants and our reviewers because we value your time so much and the time that you share with us. But there's always room for improvement. So as you're going through this process, please, if you have ideas of how to make it better, let me know. And I'll work to do that. But if there's nothing else, just a big thank you again to everybody, and we'll look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you, Carrie.
All Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Carrie.